It was a bit unexpected. Usually these sorts of announcements come with a bit of speculation in diplomatic or industry circles, for example. There was none of that leading up to today's meeting. There is even some suggestion this decision was quite literally worked out in the room between the Prime Minister and the Chinese Premier. This is the last of the major trade barriers that had been put in place over the past 5 to 10 years or so that affected industries like coal, barley and wine in particular. All of those had already been lifted. Lobsters were the last, and it looks like that trade ban will now be lifted before the next Lunar New Year, so around January or so. This is a significant export industry, not a huge export industry for Australia, but a significant one worth about $700 million a year. The last time it was up and running back in 2019, so the industry we're hoping to rebuild fairly quickly here too. It is a bit of a diplomatic achievement for the Prime Minister. The government will claim some vindication for its diplomatic approach to China in announcing this decision. This is the 5th meeting between the Prime Minister and Premier Li, and they're pointing to the regularity of these meetings, the normality of it, as a bit of a return to normal leader-level dialogue. The Prime Minister's rejected the idea of megaphone diplomacy in the past, saying that this cautious and careful approach will work, and he'll point to this trade victory as a bit of vindication for that. Here's the Prime Minister speaking in Laos a little earlier this morning.
This will be welcomed by the people engaged in the live lobster industry in places like Geraldton and South Australia and Tasmania and so many parts of particularly regional Australia where this is just one of the elements that produce jobs for Australians, and that is what our priority has been.
And Tom, we will be speaking to a manager of a fisheries business out of South Australia on that ban lift a little bit later. But just before I let you go, Tom, this obviously wasn't the only thing that was discussed today. What other topics were on the agenda?
Yeah, look, the opening remarks at this meeting were quite friendly. The Premier Li described Anthony Albanese as an old friend. They remarked upon how regularly they have been meeting, including in Australia only a few months ago. But that said, there were some quite serious topics discussed that go to the ongoing challenges in the Australia-China relationship. The South China Sea, tensions over the South China Sea, really key among those. Also, the recent test firing of an intercontinental ballistic missile over the Pacific. That raised a lot of alarm in Australia, New Zealand and right across the Pacific. The Prime Minister says he did raise that directly with Premier Li. Of course, they don't go into the detail of these discussions, but it did indicate that that was raised too. Also, the ongoing detention of Australian writer Yang Hengjun. Of course, we've seen the Australian journalist Cheng Lei released from detention in Beijing only a year or so ago, but Yang Hengjun does remain in detention. There is clearly a lot of work to go in fully repairing the Australia-China relationship. There are some key points of tension that do remain, but the Prime Minister is trying to indicate that the relationship is returning to a level of normality where these kinds of difficult issues can be openly discussed in these kinds of meetings.